The soldiers came at dusk, with rifles drawn. Captain Morrison was a man carved from stone and discipline, the kind of officer who believed mercy was a form of weakness. He sat on his horse while his men surrounded my homestead, and when he spoke, his voice was the voice of absolute authority. "You're harboring a deserter, Samuel Dern, a soldier who turned traitor. We're taking him." My hands were empty, but felt like weapons. Behind me, in the barn, was a man I'd found bleeding in my fields 3 days ago. A man I'd given water and bandages to. A man whose name I'd never asked. "There's nobody here but me," I said. "Your neighbors saw smoke from your barn, saw a man, saw you bringing supplies." He gestured, and soldiers moved toward the barn. "You can come peacefully, or we can arrest you both. Your choice." Sarah, my wife of 30 years, gripped my arm from the doorway. I could feel her trembling. And I understood in that frozen moment that sometimes kindness is treason. Sometimes helping someone in need becomes collaboration with the enemy. Sometimes there's no choice that doesn't cost everything. But before this moment shattered our world, the story goes, let me take you back to where it all began. I was 63 years old and had spent my entire life on this land. My name is Samuel Dern. I came to the frontier when I was 30, before the Indian Wars, before the disputes over territory and resources turned neighbor against neighbor. Sarah and I built this homestead stone by stone. We raised 3 children here. 2 of them are buried in the cemetery on the hill. The frontier teaches you that life is fragile. It teaches you kindness, not because kindness is noble, but because kindness is necessary. You help your neighbor not from virtue, but from the knowledge that someday you might be the one bleeding in a ditch. That was the code I lived by. I found the soldier on a Tuesday morning, clearing rocks from the eastern pasture. He was face down in the grass, his uniform torn and bloodied. At first, I thought he was dead, but when I turned him over, his eyes flickered open, confused, fevered, desperate. "Please," he whispered, "please don't turn me in." I should have ridden to town, should have reported it. The army had been clear about deserters. Anyone harboring one was complicit. But I saw my son in his face, not literally, but in the way he was broken, the way he had given up hope. I brought him to the barn. Sarah knew immediately. "Samuel," she said, watching me bring medical supplies to the barn, "this is dangerous." "The boy is dying," I replied. "Would you have me let him die?" The army has enough soldiers," I said. "They have enough power. Let them take the land. Let them take the resources, but this one boy, I can save." He was feverish for 2 days. I thought he might die anyway, that all my care would be for nothing. But gradually, the fever broke. His eyes cleared, and when he could finally speak clearly, he told me his name was Marcus Webb, and he'd run because he couldn't do it anymore. "Couldn't do what?" I asked. "The things they asked, the things we were told to do to clear the territory, to make way for settlers. They said it was duty, they said it was necessary, but I couldn't look at what we were doing and call it duty anymore." "What did you do?" He wouldn't answer, and I understood that some knowledge is a burden you don't ask for. Sarah brought him food, bandages, water. She didn't speak to him much, but I saw her watching him with an expression I couldn't quite read. Pity, maybe? Or recognition? or the particular sorrow of a woman who understands that her husband has made a choice that will cost them both. On the fourth day, she took me aside. "People have been asking questions in town," she said quietly, "about smoke from our property, about whether we've seen soldiers. They're looking for someone." "They'll move on," I said. "No, they won't. The army doesn't move on. They settle in, and they investigate, and they find." She gripped my hand. "Samuel, if they find him here, they'll hang you. They'll burn this property. They'll take everything we've built." "I know," I said. "And you're going to let him stay anyway?" "Yes." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, not from sadness, but from the terrible clarity of a woman watching her husband choose conscience over survival. "Then God help us both," she whispered.
The soldiers appeared on the horizon like a dark line drawn across the sky. I saw them from the eastern field, a troop, maybe 20 of them, moving with military precision toward our property. Captain Morrison at the front, his uniform immaculate, his expression hard as flint. I had time to run, time to saddle a horse and disappear into the territories north of here, where the army's reach was limited and men could disappear into anonymity. I went to the barn instead. Marcus was sitting in the hay, his shoulder wound still bandaged but healing. When he saw my face, he understood immediately. "Go," I said. "Take a horse. Ride north. I'll tell them you were already gone when they arrived." "They'll know you're lying," Marcus said quietly. "They'll know I was here." "Probably. Then I can't leave. Not like this. Not and have you destroyed for it." I felt something crack inside me. Not hope exactly, but something like acceptance. Then we face it together. We walked out to meet them as they rode up to the barn. Sarah stood on the porch, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. The captain dismounted with the certainty of a man who'd never faced a question he couldn't answer with authority. "The deserter," he said. "Hand him over, and you both walk free. His name is Marcus Webb, and he's under my protection." Something flickered in Morrison's face, surprise maybe that I'd admitted it so easily. "You understand what you're saying. You're confessing to harboring a traitor to the United States Army. I'm saying I found a wounded man and gave him shelter. I'm saying the law of kindness supersedes your military code." "There is no such law on the frontier," Morrison said coldly. "There's only order and chaos, and you, Samuel Dern, have chosen chaos." His men moved to seize Marcus, and I stepped between them. I didn't fight. I wasn't a fool. I was an old man facing armed soldiers. But I didn't move either. I stood in the space between Marcus and the army's authority, and I made them choose whether to move me by force. Morrison watched me for a long moment. Then he smiled, a smile with no warmth in it at all. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Perhaps, but it's mine to make." One of the soldiers grabbed my arm. They were rough but not vicious, just doing their job. They pulled me aside and moved toward Marcus, who didn't resist, didn't run. Sarah screamed, not a scream of rage, but a scream of terrible knowledge, the sound of a woman watching her entire life burn. That's when Marcus spoke. "I have evidence," he said. His voice was steady, clear. "Documents, orders, names, everything the Army needs to know about what we were told to do in the territories, why we were there, who ordered it." The soldiers stopped. Morrison's face went very still. "I'll give you everything," Marcus continued, "but only if you let him go. Samuel Dern goes free, and his property is protected. That's the trade." Morrison's jaw clenched. You could see him calculating the value of evidence versus the precedent of letting a man harbor a deserter go unpunished. "You're not in a position to negotiate," he said. "Neither are you," Marcus replied. "Not really, not if those documents exist." They took Marcus into town that evening. The trial, if you could call it that, lasted 3 days. Morrison wanted the documents destroyed, the whole affair buried, but Marcus had copies hidden in places the army would never find them. He gave them to the territorial judge, to the newspapers, to anyone who would listen. The story that emerged was ugly. The army had been systematically clearing native territories, not for security reasons, but for economic advantage. They'd killed indiscriminately. They'd burned villages. They'd done things that no court-martial could make acceptable. Marcus testified to all of it. 3 weeks after his arrest, he was released. The army claimed it was an error, that he'd been misidentified, that the real deserter was someone else. But everyone knew the truth. Marcus had traded his testimony for freedom, and he used that testimony to expose an institution that had become corrupt. The last time I saw him, he came to the homestead. "I wanted to tell you something," he said. "I wasn't running because I was a coward. I was running because I'd done the things they told me to do, and I realized I was a coward, so I ran." "Why did you stay?" I asked. "You could have disappeared. You had time." "Because you showed me something," Marcus said. "You showed me that there's another way to live, not by obeying orders, not by accepting what you're told is necessary, but by deciding every single day what kind of person you want to be." He rode north after that, and I never saw him again. But Sarah and we stayed. The property wasn't confiscated. We weren't arrested. The army needed to move on to other problems, and we were too small, too insignificant, too much like good people to warrant revenge. We'd been saved by virtue of our insignificance. That's the terrible mercy of the frontier sometimes. Not that righteousness prevails, but that righteousness gives up when it's too much trouble to pursue.
5 years have passed since that day. The territories are quieter now. The army pulled back. The political wind shifted, and the exposure of their conduct made it difficult for them to maintain the aggressive expansion they'd been pursuing. Sarah and I are older now. Our hair's white, our hands are weathered, but we're still here, on the same land, maintaining the same code. Sometimes I think about Marcus. Wonder if he's alive, if he's found peace. I like to believe he has, that somewhere in a place where the frontier is still wild and open, he's learned to forgive himself for the things he was ordered to do. And I think about that moment when I chose to shelter him, when I made the decision that cost me everything in the moment, but ultimately cost me nothing because someone else was willing to pay the true price. That's what I understand now. There's always a price. Someone always pays. The question is only whether you're willing to let it be you or whether you'll make someone else bear it. I chose to bear it, and the weight turned out to be lighter than I feared. The frontier teaches you many things, but the most important is this: the only thing that separates us from the machinery of power is our willingness to say no, to shelter the wounded, to believe in something larger than orders. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough. Thank you for listening to this tale here on Frontier Love Tales. If this story of a man choosing conscience over obedience, if it reminded you that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is help a stranger and face the consequences, then make sure you subscribe. Because out here on the frontier, every sunset hides another story waiting to be told. Stories of ordinary people making extraordinary choices. Stories about what it costs to be kind when kindness is dangerous. Stories about the quiet revolutions that change everything. Subscribe, because these stories matter.